Summer of 1983. In the teacher's office at the first high school. Mr. Harry, I've made up my mind. I plan to continue my studies, but the spot for Peking University has been replaced by studying pure data at the National Defense University. The autumn wind felt biting cold. Emma, looking frail and delicate, had a determined look in her eyes. Harry was taken aback for a moment, then his face lit up with joy. Emma finally came around. I thought you were giving up your Peking University spot to your cousin, so you could marry James. But you know, the decryption major at National Defense University is super special. You'd need to clear your identity and go incognito. Have you talked this over with your family? No need to discuss it. I've decided for myself. Emma's eyes showed a hint of pain, quickly replaced by resolve. Once she vanished from their world completely, maybe she wouldn't have to lose anything else. Just because her uncle died saving her in a river, her parents took in her cousin, saying Emma owed her a life and needed to learn to compromise. Her parents tried to make up for the debt by giving everything good to her cousin. Even her own fiancé fell for her. Family and love both taken away. Now they wanted her Peking University spot too. Her parents forced her to agree, and James even suggested trading it for a marriage certificate. She spent all last night thinking on a small balcony bed, and finally realized, this time, she wouldn't give in. She decided to cut ties with them, and wanted nothing to do with any of it. Red leaves like fire lined the cold streets as Emma walked, her lonely silhouette surrounded by blue-collared workers biking home, smiles of contentment on their faces. The bustling world felt out of sync with her. A jeep pulled up, blocking her way. Get in! The window rolled down to reveal a cold, pretty face. James sounded impatient. Explain to the school? Emma stayed silent. Sure, she explained, but not like James instructed, giving up the Peking University spot. Instead, she headed somewhere James couldn't reach. Before Emma could respond, Kyle peeked out from the back seat, showing off a pile of stuff. Cousin, look what Big Brother bought for me: clothes, shoes, even a radio. He said if I go to Peking University, I shouldn't be looked down upon. Emma's gaze landed on the necklace around Kyle's neck, her face turning pale, heart feeling pierced through. It was a keepsake from Emma's grandma, a token of love meant for James. She never imagined James would spoil Kyle so much he'd give it away. James noticed Emma's stare, awkwardness fleetingly in his eyes, quickly returning to calm. Kyle liked it. It wasn't anything special anyways. After we get married, I'll buy you something better. Bitterness filled Emma's heart. The necklace wasn't valuable, but it symbolized love. Sadly, James made it sound insignificant. Makes sense. James never really loved her, so why would he treasure it? Kyle, sensing the talk of marriage, showed fierce jealousy, pretending to be hurt and started crying. Brother, cousin seems unhappy. Is she mad I took her Peking University spot? Sorry, it's my fault. I shouldn't have taken it. No wonder I'm unwanted. James couldn't stand seeing Kyle upset. His face turned stormy, glaring at Emma. Kyle's life has been rough enough. You've got everything. Why are you still competing with her? He quickly comforted Kyle, patting his head. Don't worry. The Peking University spot is yours. No one's taking it. You walk home and think it over. Come apologize to Kyle when you've realized, or I won't forgive you. With that, he hit the gas and left, leaving a cloud of dust and smoke. At the back, Kyle wore a smug smile, taunting Emma. Her coughing fit left tears streaming down. See? She hadn't said or done anything, yet everything was her fault. Emma stood there a long time. A single maple leaf landed on her shoulder, and the thin clothing brought an icy chill. Her parents had favored her cousin so much she had nowhere to go. James once said as long as he was around, she'd never lack love. Too bad. Even the man who promised to protect her forever had changed. The sky was gray. Emma wiped her tears, pulling a white rabbit creamy candy from her pocket, giving a bitter smile. The candy was a treasure she had kept for years, a gift from James. He said when she was sad, having candy would make life a bit sweeter. Emma never had the heart to eat it, keeping it till now. But now it had expired, just like James' love, turning into trash. Emma tossed the candy down the drain, along with her biased parents and her unfaithful fiancé. She wanted none of it. When she got home, she heard laughter inside. She looked up at the sky. The sunset clouds looked like a mocking face, laughing at her lonely shadow. Since her parents brought Kyle home, Emma always felt extra. Just because her uncle had saved her, she had to constantly give in, from toys, clothes her parents love, to now her fiancé. She felt like a ghost haunting this world, silently standing at the door, the laughter inside piercing her heart like a sharp dagger, bleeding out onto the floor, casting a big shadow that swallowed her. Emma opened the door, and the laughter died. Her presence seemed to interrupt their happy family time. Mrs. Wilson glanced her way, pointed at a little stool, with a bowl of rice with just a few greens on it. Meanwhile, their table had fish, meat, and beef. Her parents always said her cousin needed nutrition to grow, giving her the best, forcing Emma to give up. Now all she had was a shabby little bed on the balcony, eating leftovers. They never thought, just half a year older than Kyle, Emma needed nourishment too. Getting up, Mrs. Wilson deliberately placed a piece of fish in Emma's bowl, smiling. "This is your favorite fish. Sit down and eat." Emma replied blank-faced, "Mom, I'm allergic to fish. My cousin's the one who likes it." Mrs. Wilson, unlike before, didn't show impatience or scold her for being difficult. Instead, she looked kindly. "Did you explain to the school? Let your cousin have the Peking University spot. Your grades are good. You can try again next year." Emma kept silent. Mrs. Wilson's face changed, and she said harshly, "How can you refuse? You owe your cousin a life. Giving up your spot at Peking University is nothing. You should be sensible." No matter how many times it happened, Mrs. Wilson's favoritism always hurt Emma deeply. Mr. Wilson put down his chopsticks and slapped Emma hard across the face, looking at her like an enemy. "How did I raise such an ungrateful daughter? If you disagree, get out of this house. I have no daughter like you." Emma's head buzzed, a red handprint blooming on her cheek, as her parents' furious stares cut into her like knives, leaving her trembling. Tears coursing down his face, Kyle lamented, "Don't push Cousin Emma, please. I feel terrible. Maybe I'm just not meant to study. It's not her fault. It's because no one cherishes me." The parents quickly comforted him and promised that Emma would give up her spot at Peking University and buy him many gifts. Kyle stopped crying and looked at Emma's pale face. "Cousin, I never meant to take anything from you. If you mind, I can leave." Mr. Wilson, furious, glared at Emma. "Are you happy now? The house is in chaos because of you. Apologize to your cousin." Wiping blood from the corner of her mouth, Emma looked at everyone around her, seeing them as they devised ways to ruin her. Just when Mr. Wilson was about to hit her again, James spoke up. Emma already agreed to give up her spot at Peking University. She informed the school today. Only then did her parents relax a bit, giving a dismissive snort. Mrs. Wilson contemplated, and then addressed Emma. "You should have more sense. Since your cousin is going to school, you'll go to work to earn her tuition. Remember, it's what you owe her." Emma gazed blankly at Mrs. Wilson, unable to fathom how the woman who gave birth to her could utter such cruel words. Mrs. Wilson, undisturbed by her daughter's reaction, commanded in an unquestionable tone, "After the summer, start working. You're just taking up space at home." Her parents nodded in agreement. They began planning a celebration for Kyle, as going to Peking University was a big deal for the family. No one paid attention to Emma. Her presence was like that of a trash can, used when needed and discarded without hesitation. Emma didn't know when she found herself lying in bed, her heart numb from pain. Staying in this loveless household suffocated her. Her damp, moldy sheets, in use for over a decade, barely covered half her body. Kyle, on the other hand, had a bright, spacious room filled with toys and candy from the general store. Emma slept on a narrow, rain-exposed balcony for 10 years, enduring storms, winters, and snow. Though it was a hot summer, she felt utterly cold inside. Staring at the night sky, Emma thought, in a month she'd leave this unloving place. If this family didn't need her, she'd disappear for good. That night, Emma dreamed. In her dream, her parents tenderly held her close, eyes brimming with love. Her brother James, 2 years older, pinched her cheek, calling her cute. She didn't want to wake from the warmth, but as Kyle appeared like a nightmare, her parents' faces turned grotesque, and they yelled at her while James walked away, further and further. Emma sobbed, begging them not to abandon her. but a chasm below swallowed her into despair. Her parents and James didn't look back, walking off with Kyle, leaving her in endless darkness. Fireworks outside woke Emma. Her pillow was wet with tears. She thought she was beyond being hurt by them, but deep down, she craved love and recognition. It was just a dream. A jeep pulled into the yard, and seeing the tall man step out, Emma quickly went downstairs. "Emma, I heard you got into Peking University. Well done." The tall man was James's father, an old family friend who owed his life to Mr. Wilson. Because of that, they arranged a child marriage. Robert was the only one genuinely kind to Emma. He ruffled her hair, glancing at his son beside him, nodding. "At least you did one decent thing, setting off fireworks for Emma." James frowned. "Dad, they're not for Emma. She gave up Peking University for Kyle, who promises to work hard and won't disappoint." Robert's expression darkened as he was about to scold him, but was stopped by Emma. Forcing a smile, Emma said, "Uncle, you just got home. Rest up. I'll explain another day." She didn't want Robert to press too much, which could reveal her plans to attend the National Defense University for a secret major. She just wanted a quiet exit, without further entanglement. Robert's face changed, giving his son a stern look before storming off. Left alone were Emma and James. James, expressionless, said, "Don't mention our engagement to my dad yet. Also, give a reasonable explanation for the university spot." "Got it." Emma lowered her head, murmuring agreement, showing little emotion. James, noble enough to marry someone he didn't love to help Kyle attend university, was truly admirable. "Kyle is sensitive. Don't mention the engagement to her. You still haven't apologized for yesterday." "Why?" James demanded before Emma could respond. "Kyle's leaving for Peking University soon. Give her some fabric and food coupons as a gesture of genuine blessing." Seeing James always consider Kyle first made Emma feel suffocated, as if carrying a heavy stone. "Do you think I still have those coupons? With all your love and my parents' love, what else does she lack?" James was stunned, finally remembering Emma's situation, a complicated look crossing his face. "Don't worry. Since I promised to marry you, I won't go back on my word." James could only comfort Emma with the thought of marriage. "Are you really going to marry our cousin?" James's expression changed dramatically. He looked sharply toward the front door. There was Kyle, leaning on the doorframe, face pale and full of pain. "It's not like that." James didn't even get a chance to explain before Kyle started banging her head against the wall, looking agonized. "I don't want you to marry our cousin. I like you too." Kyle seemed utterly distressed. James panicked, quickly pushed Emma aside and held Kyle. Their parents rushed out, faces turning serious at the sight of Kyle. The three of them hurried Kyle into the car and headed to the hospital. Before leaving, James shot a cold glance at Emma, his voice icy. "Did you see that? You did that to provoke Kyle, didn't you? I didn't think you could be so devious." Seeing James's look of disgust, it felt like a heavy blow to Emma's chest. Whatever Kyle wanted, the family would rally around her, and all mistakes seemed to fall on Emma. Images of James's angry face kept flashing in her mind. Emma told herself not to cry over a man who didn't love her, but she couldn't stop the tears from falling. Kyle's little tricks were easy enough to see through if one paid attention. James used to dislike how the family favored Kyle, and during Emma's darkest times, he'd take her from the house, announcing to the whole neighborhood that nobody could bully Emma anymore. Back then, James was so good to Emma, showering her with gifts. But at some point that changed. He went from disliking Kyle to feeling sorry for her. Kyle always seemed to overshadow Emma, taking everything away. Emma watched the car drive away, tears falling unchecked. This was the last time she'd cry for James, and the last time she'd feel sad about this loveless family. From now on, she'd live for herself, using her youth to contribute to her country. Emma returned home and started packing up the stuff on her little balcony. There were boxes filled with all the gifts James had given her. Everything from puppet toys to a piece of autumn leaf. She treasured them, refusing to throw them away. But now they were just trash to her. Emma gathered up all the gifts and set them on fire in the yard, burying her love for James in the flames. Just as the gifts were nearly all burned, James walked into the yard and saw the scene. His face changed, and a strong sense of panic rose within him. His voice trembled a bit as he looked at Emma incredulously. "Emma, these are the gifts I gave you. Why are you burning them?" Something seemed to slip beyond his control, leaving him inexplicably anxious. Emma watched the puppets burn until they turned to a pile of charcoal, then slowly turned her head, meeting his gaze with a very calm expression. In that moment, James felt like the girl in front of him was slipping away. Emma took a deep breath, and as the gifts turned to ashes, something in her heart finally let go. She no longer cared who her parents favored, or who James cared about. None of it mattered to her anymore. She would walk her own path. "The gifts were moldy, so I'm burning them," Emma said, wanting to tell James outright that she no longer loved him. But with a little over 20 days until she could move on, she chose to hold back. James felt relieved and nodded. "It's just as well. They weren't worth much anyway. I can get you new ones after we get married." Emma smiled, but they wouldn't be getting married, and there was no after. James, thinking Emma had no other choices and wouldn't really leave, returned to his usual superior demeanor, frowning unhappily. "Don't sulk all the time. Kyle lost her parents and has depression. She can't be upset. You have everything. There's no need to fight for it." Emma couldn't help but laugh, a touch of sarcasm in her tone as she asked, "What do I have exactly?" "My parents' love, my fiancé's attention, even a decent piece of clothing?" Kyle took everything away, and James couldn't stand Emma's complaints, growing impatient. "Don't you have parents in me? Kyle's in the hospital and hurting. You should apologize to her." Emma thought she must have misheard. Kyle's depression was clearly an act, but everyone pretended not to see. Her voice turned cold. "She's got my parents with her, your care, and a whole crew of medical staff. Why would I be needed?" James got angry. "How can you be so heartless? You gave Kyle depression. No matter what, as her cousin, you should be more gracious. If you don't realize your mistakes, it's because we've spoiled you too much, Emma. Don't say I didn't give you a chance. If you don't go to the hospital, we might have to postpone the marriage." With that, he stormed off, seemingly using the promise of marriage as a threat to make her comply unconditionally. Emma didn't react, watching the car leave with a sense of calm. Back home, she began packing to leave, but realized there was nothing worth taking in the big house. At night, her parents returned home, not giving Emma a friendly look, seemingly blaming her for upsetting Kyle. Mrs. Wilson approached, looking serious. "Emma, let go of James. Kyle likes him too, and she's threatening suicide in the hospital. You're her cousin. You should be the bigger person." Even knowing Mrs. Wilson's blatant favoritism toward Kyle, Emma didn't expect it to be so shameless. Her words hit like an icy wind in the summer heat. Emma's expression was numb, locking eyes with her mother, her voice hoarse. "Mom, I'm your daughter. You always said to give in to Kyle. Haven't I done enough? Anything new at home? The meat at the table, new clothes for New Year, my room." Everything went to her. "I gave up Beijing University, and now I have to give up James too. For did she really say she wanted me dead, and I should just rip out my heart to give it to her? Mom, am I even your daughter?" Emma couldn't hold back her anger anymore, and asked the question that burned in her soul. Mrs. Wilson slapped Emma across the face, disappointment written all over her face. "That's your cousin. She lost her dad because of you. Haven't you got enough already? Your dad was right. You're ungrateful. You're going to give in, whether you like it or not, or you're not my daughter." Mrs. Wilson left these harsh words hanging in the air as she turned and walked away. Emma leaned against the doorframe, the setting sun above feeling like a mocking face, making her feel like the world's biggest joke. In their eyes, she had been so blessed. Before long, James returned to the yard and got straight to the point. "Emma, Kyle's mental state is really bad right now, so we're delaying the marriage registration." She wasn't suggesting, she was ordering. Emma, who has accumulated enough disappointment, wasn't saddened anymore. Emma pulled a pale face, took one serious breath, and said word by word, "Fine." James didn't expect Emma to agree so easily without making a scene. He stood there, stunned for what felt like a long time. Emma wasn't looking at James. Her gaze fell on the plane tree outside the yard, remembering when she was 11 years old. Kyle framed her, and her parents beat her black and blue, left her at the family's mercy and kicked her out. She cried underneath that tree, all alone and desperate. It was James who came to her, offering his hand and a gentle smile. "Come home with me." Back then, he stood tall and confident, like a ray of light piercing her dark world, bringing hope into Emma's life. James had hoped she would get into Peking University and achieve her dreams. So, when the college entrance exams came back in '78, Emma secretly worked hard and finally got the admission to Peking University. She thought she could always follow James's steps and be together forever. Now it all seemed like an illusion. The James in front of her had changed, pushing her to compromise every step of the way. All for Kyle, for love's sake, to marry someone he didn't even love. Wow, what a great love. When James announced the delay in their registration, Emma's heart was calm, without expectations. The delay would undoubtedly lead to broken promises. When that time came, she would lose her chance to study, and James wouldn't marry her. That was a certainty. Fortunately, she kept her spot at Peking University. In just over 20 days, she'd leave this place full of sadness for the National Defense University, cutting ties with them completely. "Emma, don't overthink it. Since I promised you, I won't go back on my word. The main issue is Kyle's mental instability, and I don't want to upset her." James was unsettled by Emma's calm demeanor and attempted to explain. Emma withdrew her gaze from the plane tree and suddenly asked, "Brother, do you remember, when we were 11, what you promised me under that tree?" James's face changed slightly, as if recalling something. A flash of guilt crossed his eyes. But just as he was about to speak, a guard came rushing over, looking worried. "James, the hospital just called." She hurt herself again. James furrowed his eyebrows and bolted into the car, no longer able to spare a thought for Emma. Watching the Jeep speed away, Emma turned and went back into her room. The small balcony had nothing much, burnt gifts from James, and a few worn clothes. It was as if, aside from her own life, the family hadn't given her anything. At one time, they'd given her a lot, but that had all gone to Kyle. James was gone for a week. During these days, her parents were at Kyle's side at the hospital. Emma enjoyed the peace, not needing to see Kyle's sick face or face her parents' favoritism. She reached out to Robert, wishing to train her body and better prepare for National Defense University. Since she chose to study encryption, she would face significant dangers in the future. Robert didn't think twice, feeling she was motivated, and taught her without reservation. Another week passed, and one day Emma was training in the yard, covered in sweat but glowing with energy. She'd cut off her long black hair. James once said he liked gentle and virtuous girls, so she kept that long, flowing hair on purpose. Now she didn't need to go to Peking University for James, but lived solely for herself. By cutting her hair, she felt renewed. Robert looked at her, deeply moved, and thought this was the spirit of a female soldier. Robert, though unsure why Emma was training, vaguely sensed something but didn't pry. The young should handle their issues themselves. Yet his old friends were ridiculously biased. Often on missions outside, he found it hard to intervene. If Emma needed help, he wouldn't mind lending a hand. The calm was eventually shattered by Kyle's return home. Emma was striking a martial pose in the yard, and looked up to see her parents and James chatting and laughing as they surrounded Kyle, who was clinging to James intimately, occasionally nuzzling him. Her parents looked away, pretending not to notice, even pleased. James didn't protest but felt Emma's gaze, then pushed Kyle away in haste. Kyle's eyes immediately welled with tears. "Brother, do you resent me?" James looked embarrassed and let Kyle cling back. Kyle entered the house, throwing a taunting and mocking look at Emma. Emma remained calm, as if the four of them had nothing to do with her, focusing on her training. An hour slipped by without her noticing, and Emma finished her workout with a deep breath. A rare summer breeze blew, and she closed her eyes, soaking in the rare comfort in the yard. National Defense University? At that moment, hearing a trembling voice behind her, Emma opened her eyes to see James holding a magazine, a flicker of panic in his gaze. James had escorted Kyle back to her room, and, noticing a National Defense University magazine on the small balcony bed, felt a wave of unease. He hurried downstairs to question Emma. "Why are you looking into National Defense University?" At James's interrogation, Emma stayed calm, not answering right away. and instead grabbed a towel to wipe her sweat. "Speak up," James said, gripping Emma's hand with a slight tremble, as if he was losing something precious. Emma gently pulled away from the hand she once longed to hold, feeling no emotion at this point. She smiled casually, just looking around. James studied Emma's eyes, thinking she appeared honest and wouldn't lie to him, feeling relieved. He nodded, agreeing, "Nothing much to see really. With your health, you're not fit for the National Defense University. You're better off studying for the college entrance exam next year. You've got good grades, there's always a chance." Emma shrugged it off. "Do you actually think I have a chance? My parents want me to work over the summer to support my cousin's education. I'll be leaving soon." James' expression changed, caught between words. He felt guilty and his tone softened. "Don't worry, I won't let you work," he reassured. "Money's not a problem. I've set aside enough for Kyle's education." Emma smirked to herself. Just look at that. James covered all bases for Kyle, even preparing tuition fees, taking away her Beijing University spot without hesitation. She saw the panic in James, but she didn't think it was love, just guilt. Her parents would force her to work if Kyle made a fuss, and James would stay silent. But she stopped caring a while ago. Seeing her quiet, James thought she was jealous and touched her head. He noticed her new hairstyle, a stark contrast to her former sweet and gentle look. Although Emma was right there, it felt like she was slipping away. James felt out of control. "Emma, I will marry you, believe me. It's just a matter of time," James promised steadfastly. Before, Emma would have been thrilled, but now she just replied with calm indifference, unsettling James even more. From the second-floor balcony, Kyle watched them, eyes filled with resentment. That night, Emma went to bed early, not wanting to see her parents' doting affection for Kyle. Plus, training wore her out. She left home for school early the next morning. At the teacher's office, she met a stern, dignified woman in uniform, who introduced herself as a professor from the National Defense University's decryption department. She was there on a mission, and to take Emma to the university later. The decryption department was special, with early recruitment not following regular procedures. Professors personally escort students to a secretive training place. After organizing everything, the professor said she'd return in a week to get Emma. As Emma walked home, she thought about the professor in uniform and felt inspired. She hoped to study hard and serve her country, becoming like her. Her home was cold and loveless, but Emma found new hope in anticipating her future at the National Defense University. Returning home as dusk fell, with her parents nowhere to be seen, Emma went inside. Kyle sat on her small bed, looking down at her. "Cousin, it seems James likes me more," Kyle sneered. "See, whatever I want of yours becomes mine. Why stay in this house? You should just die." Emma, having newfound hope, wasn't fazed by Kyle's taunts. Kyle had expected to provoke a breakdown, to see her collapse in despair like before, and relished it. But now Emma's calmness left Kyle dissatisfied. Absent-mindedly recalling James' promise to Emma earlier, Kyle grew envious. Even self-harm didn't change that James only delayed his commitment to Emma instead of truly making Kyle his own. In frustration, Kyle escalated her provocation. With madness in her eyes, Kyle grabbed Emma, whispering coldly, "What if you push me in jealousy? Who would they believe?" Emma's face changed, and as she tried to break free, Kyle pushed her down the stairs. "Help! Don't kill me!" Kyle cried out, banging her head against the wall, leaving her face bloody before collapsing next to Emma. Falling from the second floor, Emma hit the ground hard, struggling to breathe from the pain. Kyle's screams soon brought her parents and James running to them. Without pause, her father kicked Emma's stomach in rage. "How could you do this to Kyle?" Stunned, Emma looked at her parents' angry faces, swallowing all her explanations. She shut her eyes, feeling like a knife had stabbed her heart. Her father's contempt squeezed through clenched teeth. "Didn't think you'd be so evil, trying to kill out of jealousy. You're worse than a crook. You're no daughter of mine." Mr. Wilson, eyes blazing, kicked her repeatedly. Mrs. Wilson cradled Kyle, crying, "I only stepped out for a moment, and now this happened. Kyle, hang in there. I'm taking you to the hospital." Kyle, bloody-faced but mostly with surface wounds, wailed, wrenching her parents' and James' hearts. But out of their view, she shot Emma a cruel smirk. Emma, bashed and bruised, hurt far worse than Kyle. Her injuries and repeated kicks curled her like a shrimp. But nothing matched the hurt in her heart. Her parents never believed her. Words seemed useless. Their loyalty to Kyle was absolute. Minutes passed before Emma slowly stood, pale and trembling, meeting James' disappointed gaze. Kyle was crying pathetically. "Cousin, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have clung to my brother and asked her to stay with me. I know you hate me, and if my death would make you happy, I'll give my life to you. No need to make my aunt, uncle, and brother sad." Emma stared at Kyle coldly, watching her act, then glanced at her parents' angry faces and felt darkness and despair engulf her. She was used to loneliness and sadness. She planned to let her parents and James go, not wanting her trashy relatives anymore. Why did Kyle keep framing her? James slapped Emma across the face. His voice was icy. "I've said that we'd get married. Why are you harming Kyle? She's sad enough. Do you want to push her to death?" A red mark appeared on Emma's cheek, with blood at the corner of her mouth. She blankly stared at James. Like her parents, he blindly believed Kyle. In their eyes, she was the villain. Emma wanted to explain to James, thinking he might at least have doubts, but now it seemed unnecessary. James shook his head, looking disappointed. "Your actions are chilling. How can I marry someone who uses such underhanded tactics? Emma, you're really disappointing." The three of them didn't glance at Emma again, and took Kyle to the hospital. Kyle turned back and smiled at Emma, a smile like a devil crawling out of hell. As the car disappeared, Emma couldn't hold on anymore, spat a mouthful of blood and collapsed. The night was deep and cold with frost. Emma regained consciousness, her body numb. She crawled home, rested in bed for a few hours to regain some strength, and treated her own injuries. The night was as cold as water, but not as cold as her frozen heart. Her parents and James's actions were like a dull knife, stabbing a big hole in her heart. Her already fragmented mental world collapsed again. Emma was like a wounded puppy, licking her wounds on the dark balcony. She had no more tears. Her feelings were numb, just a shell without a soul. She hoped time would pass quickly, not wanting to stay in this heartless house that felt like it could swallow her anytime. Lying in bed and looking at the night sky, she missed her deceased grandma, the only person who truly loved her. Half asleep, a bucket of cold water woke her. Before she could open her eyes, a strong grip dragged her to the living room. Her parents and James returned with Kyle. Although her injuries were only superficial, to them, Emma's actions were unforgivable. Mr. Wilson kicked her hard, his expression dark. "Emma, kneel and apologize to Kyle now. If she doesn't forgive you, you're not my daughter." The icy home, the unfeeling relatives. Emma's heart, already full of holes, broke further. Her gaze swept over everyone. Her parents' hateful faces, James's disappointed eyes, and Kyle's smug grin. These were the people she was closest to, yet they hurt her repeatedly, harsher than any enemy. Clearly, Kyle was framing her, but she was being forced to apologize. In the past, to win back their love and approval, Emma would compromise, but now she despised her identity. Why was she born into such a heartless family? Seeing her stubbornness, Mr. Wilson was furious, kicking her again and shouting, "Do you really think you're not wrong?" Emma staggered and fell, spitting blood again. James looked slightly unsettled, wanting to help her, but he thought Emma deserved some punishment for what she did. He stopped Mr. Wilson, shaking his head slightly. Only then did Mr. Wilson stop. Emma's eyes flickered, thinking James might help her, but his next words made her want to laugh bitterly. James frowned, his expression indifferent. "With how you are now, you're not fit to marry me. If Kyle weren't tough, she'd be dead. As punishment, our marriage has to be delayed, and to make it up to Kyle, I'll have a wedding with her first." Emma trembled, looking at James incredulously. What kind of punishment was this? James sensed Emma's mocking look, feeling guilty and angry. "It's not a real marriage. I just want to make it up to Kyle." Her parents and James watched Emma, defensively standing in front of Kyle in case Emma lashed out. But they were disappointed. Emma didn't get angry or stop them. Instead, she smiled brightly, spat some more blood and grinned, "Congrats then, to my cousin and cousin-in-law. If that's all, I'm off to rest." Emma moved with difficulty, almost dragging herself to the balcony, not wanting to look at them again. Kyle wiped her tears, pretending to be pitiful. "Cousin, will you come to my wedding with brother? Though it's just for show, I'd be happy. I hope for your blessing." Mr. Wilson snorted. "Don't worry. Even if she doesn't want to come, I'll drag her there. Does she think she can do wrong and not pay?" Mrs. Wilson shouted at her daughter's back. "If you don't come, then get out of this house." James didn't know why, but he felt uneasy not seeing Emma's usual jealous reaction. They weren't really getting married just for show. In his heart, Emma lost herself to jealousy and couldn't continue making mistakes. If this taught her a lesson, maybe there was hope. After the wedding, he'd talk to her again. But the title cousin-in-law and the relieved smile on her face felt like a thorn piercing his heart. Why did it feel like this? After that, the three didn't bother with Emma. They didn't care if she died falling from the stairs or if she ran away. Emma cared deeply about her family and loved James with all her heart. But now, she felt she had nowhere to go. For the next 3 days, Emma stayed home to heal instead of causing a scene. Her parents and James were happily preparing for an extravagant wedding at a state-run hotel. Something extraordinary for those times. Her parents spared no expense to make Kyle happy. On the wedding day, Emma was ready early, waiting for her instructors from the National Defense University to pick her up. Her parents and Kyle had already gone to the hotel to entertain guests. James, because of his special status, wasn't wearing a suit and went over to Emma. "Emma, come with me later," James promised confidently. "Kyle and I are just going through the motions. We're not actually getting married. Trust me, I'll still marry you." Just like when she was 11, sitting outside under the sycamore tree after being kicked out by her parents, James had been her hope. But that's all changed now. Emma replied calmly with a simple mm. James sighed in relief, worried that Emma might cause a scene at the wedding. She seemed to have learned a lesson. Maybe she'll behave now. But as James insisted on taking Emma to the hotel, he noticed she didn't react the way he expected, feeling a bit unsettled. Emma remained unruffled, responding to every question like James was a stranger, not her beloved fiancé. As James attempted to force her into the car, the guard arrived, saying they couldn't wait any longer at the hotel. James had to let go, instructing Emma to show up or they'd never get married. Watching James leave in a hurry, Emma picked up her woven bag and walked out of the yard. The moment James's car drove away, the university car arrived to pick her up. The instructor asked if she wanted to say goodbye to her family. Emma glanced back at the yard, a place filled with 15 years of pain, where she no longer wanted to stay. She was fed up with biased parents and a betraying fiancé. "No need," Emma said, quickly getting into the car. Going to the National Defense University, her identity would be erased, and she would live anonymously forever. The rest of her life, she wouldn't be her parents' daughter or James's wife. She wanted to be herself, serving her country. The car drove past the state-run hotel. Through the window, Emma saw her family welcoming guests. Her parents and Kyle looked genuinely happy, and James seemed shy but a bit eager. They appeared perfect together. As the car slowly left, the four figures at the hotel gradually faded from view. Emma was about to start a life of her own. Standing at the hotel entrance, James felt a sudden premonition, looking up suddenly to see the Jeep carrying Emma driving off. For some reason, unease crept into his heart. The Wilson family parents were proudly telling everyone about their double joy. Kyle not only got into Peking University, but was marrying the most handsome man in the compound. It made James uncomfortable. Whether it was the university spot or marriage, those should belong to Emma. He only agreed to help Kyle out of necessity, but the family's attitude seemed to take it all for granted. Kyle clung to James and searched the crowd for Emma, feeling wronged. "Where's my cousin? She promised to come with blessings. Is she mad, unwilling to see me happy? I should have apologized to her on my knees." Kyle's pitiful act only fueled the parents' already simmering anger. Mr. Wilson grumbled about Emma, and Mrs. Wilson nodded in agreement, saying Emma was ungrateful and should have attended such an important day. They decided Emma should have shown more tolerance on Kyle's big day. Kyle added fuel to the fire, pretending to be sad, suggesting Emma might have feelings for her brother, and claiming she never meant to take James for real. "I just wanted a wedding for the fun of it. After it, she can have him back. If she's mad, "Let's call off the wedding," she suggested, feigning kindness that only enraged the parents further. Kyle was satisfied, thinking of Emma's despair as the family cursed her. James, outside, grew increasingly irritated. He'd only agreed to the wedding to fulfill Kyle's wish, not really marrying her. He assumed Emma would be understanding about it. But images of Emma's indifferent face kept popping into his mind. With the wedding about to start and no sign of Emma, James couldn't wait any longer and walked out. Kyle stopped him. "Brother, are you leaving me?" James turned sharply to look at Kyle, his gaze piercing. At that moment, Kyle was truly frightened, unused to seeing such fierceness in his eyes. James was restless, feeling something was wrong, and was convinced he needed to go back. "I'm going to get her," he said, ignoring Kyle's crocodile tears. Rushing back, James realized he should have properly explained to Emma that it wasn't a real marriage, just an act. Speeding back, he ran into the yard straight to the balcony, calling out, "Emma, don't be mad. Everyone's waiting for you." He yanked the curtain aside, revealing the small balcony, now spotless, the folding bed discarded in the corner, and the solitary study table was in the center with a note on top. It read, "I don't want this family anymore. James, goodbye forever." Just 2 short lines, but it felt like a sledgehammer pounding on his heart. James tried to keep his panic at bay, convincing himself, Emma must be joking. She wouldn't leave. In his mind, Emma had nowhere else to go and couldn't bear to leave her parents and him. James knew Emma well. She endured so many grievances just to stay close to her parents, craving their love. But everything in front of him now made him extremely uneasy. Desperate, James searched the yard. As time went on, he was alarmed to find that anything associated with Emma was gone. Gone was the begonia she planted for him when they were 15. Gone were the red ribbons from the swing, where she once prayed for him at 17. James hurried to the sycamore tree outside the yard. He remembered Emma loved sitting under that tree, burying her deepest secrets in the soil. Her longing for her parents' love and her secret crush on James all lay beneath that tree, sealed in a small jar. But the scene he saw shocked him like a bolt of lightning. The dirt was dug up, the jar shattered, and its contents turned to ash. That's when James realized the grave truth. Emma was truly gone. James squatted by the sycamore tree, staring at the ashes in a daze. Emma's departure had long been foreshadowed, but nobody cared to notice. A child unloved leaves with such decisiveness. She burned the gifts she gave him and destroyed beautiful memories, taking nothing, not even a sycamore leaf. James only had a sham marriage to Kyle to fulfill someone else's wish. He never planned to abandon Emma. Why did she leave then? Till now James couldn't understand. He only felt the summer air stifling, pressing hard on his chest. A hot wind blew by, scattering sycamore leaves. James glanced up blankly, seeing the past. A young girl abandoned by her family, crying under the tree. He reached out a hand, smiling, saying, "You won't be alone anymore." That night, under the cool moonlight, there was light in Emma's eyes. But at some point, she became numb again, like a living corpse, reverting to her old self. Maybe it was when he offered to exchange a marriage license for Kyle's admission into Peking University. He remembered Emma's shocked expression then. Secretly, James had always known about Emma's crush but refrained from responding, worried about gossip. Until the Wilson family came to him, asking him to convince Emma to give up her spot at Peking University for Kyle. James knew he shouldn't. He understood how important the university was to Emma. But he irrationally suggested the exchange as a convenient excuse to marry. He never expected Emma to agree so readily. James figured Emma was brilliant. She'd score just as well next year. People would have nothing to say, and they could be together like normal. But Emma seemed to misunderstand, choosing to abandon everything and leave. She can't have gone far. James stood up suddenly, realizing she had nowhere else to go. He pulled all his connections, searched every bus and train station, determined to find her. But half a day passed, and despite involving the entire security team, there was no trace of Emma. It was as though she'd vanished into thin air. The incident caught Robert's attention. His son's misuse of power was a serious issue back then. He rushed home and, seeing James's dejected figure at the door, swallowed his anger with a sigh. Robert had some idea of his son's thoughts. first canceling the search for Emma to prevent a bigger blunder, then sharing his guess. Emma went to study. James looked up shocked. The Peking University notice won't come for another half-month. Robert sneered. Who said Emma went to Peking University? She applied to the National Defense University. James felt as if he'd been struck, his body trembling. Robert couldn't stand his son's despondency, remembering how Emma was treated over the years. Disappointed, he said, I don't get why you're upset now. When she was around, you didn't cherish her. Now that she's gone, who are you pretending for? Was her leaving not because you all drove her away? Robert's words shook James. He opened his mouth to refute but couldn't utter a word. Memories flooded in. How the Wilson family blatantly favored Kyle over Emma, causing her unbearable pain. He should have been Emma's guiding light, yet he did nothing. Not only did he stay silent, but he also became part of the problem. Suddenly, he recalled 3 days ago when Kyle claimed Emma pushed her down the stairs. Emma looked at him expectant, hoping for a trace of kindness. Yet James instantly believed Kyle, and even slapped Emma, shattering all her hopes. Robert knew no words would reach his son now and didn't bother trying. Considering the Wilson families and their son's actions, Emma should have left sooner. She was a good kid, but only distance from her family would bring her happiness. Robert had offered help before, but she stubbornly hoped for change from her parents, which never came, leading to more misfortune. If it were me, I'd have left long ago, Robert snapped before storming off. As head of security, he had no time for family drama. James remained in the living room, replaying Emma's reactions recently. Maybe since that exchange offer, her hopes died. He remembered that night when Emma seriously asked, "Do you still remember your promise?" James crouched on the ground, holding his head painfully, regretting deeply. The night air was as cool as water. 9 footsteps echoed from outside as Mrs. Wilson burst into the house, looking frantic. "James, Kyle thinks you don't want her anymore. So she went crazy at the restaurant you." James listened to Mrs. Wilson go on and on, all worried about Kyle, feeling overwhelmed inside. He suddenly looked up. "What's the use of her going crazy looking for me? You only have eyes for Kyle. Do you even know where your own daughter went?" Mrs. Wilson's face was full of shock and a bit of awkwardness. "Well, what are you saying? How can you say I don't care about Emma? She's my daughter." James stared hard at Mrs. Wilson, searching for any hint of concern in her eyes, but found none. She had always been impatient with Emma. Feeling utterly disappointed, James looked out the window and said softly, "Emma went to school. She's not coming back." Mrs. Wilson's expression changed dramatically, grabbing James's hand, her eyes flaring with anger. "What school?" She agreed to give up her spot at Peking University for Kyle. "No, wait. The acceptance letter isn't supposed to come for another 2 weeks. That girl was always up to no good, just loved lying. When she comes home, I must teach her a lesson." James felt a chill for Emma, saddened by the fact that she had left, yet her own mother still complained. He suddenly ran out of patience, shrugged off Mrs. Wilson's grip, and said indifferently, "Emma went to the National Defense University, not Peking University." Mrs. Wilson's face twisted with rage as she hurled insults. How dare she go to the National Defense University? And what about Kyle? We've already announced the celebration banquet. What's Emma thinking, trying to ruin things for Kyle? No way. You need to get her back, make her give up the Peking spot. She clutched onto James, trying to drag him outside, as if Emma had committed some unforgivable act. James intended to break free, but one sentence made him go silent. Kyle slit her wrists, lost a lot of blood. James hesitated, helpless, and followed Mrs. Wilson to the hospital. It was partly his fault for leaving, causing Kyle's breakdown. He bore some responsibility. On the way, he planned to tell Kyle the truth once she was stable, that he wouldn't be involved in her affairs anymore. All he wanted was to find Emma and tell her the truth. When they reached the hospital room's door and were about to enter, they heard Kyle singing. She didn't seem depressed at all, sounded like she was in high spirits. For some reason, James felt there was something off about Kyle. He recalled Emma saying her cousin faked depression, wasn't really sick, just wanted to take what was hers. Before, James thought Emma was being unreasonable, jealous, and lying about Kyle. Now that she left, he couldn't help but rethink everything. James gestured for Mrs. Wilson to wait. He wanted to hear what Kyle was saying. Mr. Wilson had gone to get water, leaving Kyle alone in the room. She didn't show any signs of illness, sitting cross-legged on the bed with a smug grin. That brat's probably furious now. I got their parents, her university spot's mine, and even her fiancé's mine now. It's just a fake marriage, but if I make a fuss, those two fools would definitely force him to stay. Once I have him and get pregnant, would he dare to break the engagement? I'm just too smart. Even though her voice was low, the room was quiet, and the two outside heard everything. Mrs. Wilson was dumbfounded. She couldn't believe her ears. James clenched his fist so hard, a wave of fury swept through him. What did he just hear? Kyle was pretending to be sick, admitting she wanted to take everything from Emma, the parents first, then the university spot, and finally him. James felt a chill down his spine, realizing there were truly malicious people in the world. She called Emma a brat and their parents fools. Was this really the sweet, obedient Kyle they knew? James turned to look at Mrs. Wilson, feeling a profound sadness. She sent her own daughter away for this manipulative person. It was laughable. Thinking back to everything Emma had gone through, James wanted to slap himself. They were so terribly wrong, played like fools. Especially at Kyle's last remark about consummating the marriage. It made James's skin crawl. He couldn't contain his anger anymore. Kicked the door wide open. Kyle's smirk hadn't vanished when she froze, terror flashing in her eyes. Aunt brother, how long have you been here? Before James could respond, Mrs. Wilson stepped forward, grabbing Kyle's collar, her voice filled with fury. Why did you lie to me? Kyle was terrified, kneeling on the floor, her eyes darting around, trying to think of a way out. Mrs. Wilson looked pale, unable to believe what she'd heard. She had treated Kyle as her own daughter, even willing to pluck stars from the sky for her, and neglected Emma. But what did Kyle do? Called her cousin a brat and her parents fools. Mrs. Wilson raised her hand to hit Kyle, but Kyle wailed loudly, kneeling on the floor and crying out, Aunt, I was wrong. That's not what I really think. I was having a mental breakdown. I dreamt I was framed by my cousin, and that you all abandoned me. So I just said nonsense. It hurts. Before she finished, Kyle started banging her head on the floor. Mrs. Wilson, seeing all the blood, looked distressed, feeling sorry for her, subconsciously wanting to help. Kyle noticed her change in attitude and felt overjoyed. I'll personally look into everything you did to Emma over the years, James spoke coldly. Emma's departure brought back his clarity. As the youngest strategist in the defense sector, she obviously had immense capabilities. Kyle's face turned pale. She wanted to explain further. James turned and walked out of the hospital room, filled with pent-up anger. If Kyle was a cunning villain, plenty of past events would now be re-examined. Point 10, he could hardly imagine it. Everything was orchestrated by Kyle. How much had Emma suffered? Just thinking about it was terrifying. With Robert's connections, they quickly dug up Kyle's past. The more James read about Kyle's history of wrongdoings, the angrier he got. Since James stopped siding with Kyle, many were willing to speak the truth. He even found a notebook hidden in a secret compartment in Kyle's room, detailing Kyle's misdeeds. February 9th, it's my birthday. Dad got me a dress. It's so ugly. Why was I born into such a poor family? I wish Dad would die already. March 12th, Dad finally died, and he saved Emma. But why couldn't it have been James? Then I could join the Robert family with a debt of gratitude. But the Wilson family isn't so bad either. Fostered by the Wilsons, my first job is to drive Emma to her death. With her around, I can never have it all. Thankfully, my aunt really cares for me, and my schemes always succeed. I really am too clever. James flipped through the pages, his face growing darker, until he saw the entry from a few days ago. To get rid of that brat, I pushed her down the stairs on purpose. Who knew she'd survive? But that's okay. I still managed to get married to James. James' hand turned purple as he gripped the notebook, burning with anger, wanting to tear Kyle apart. So Emma had been right all along. She had suffered so much. Thinking back to when he was 11, James resented the Wilson parents' favoritism, bringing Emma home and promising to always be good to her. But somewhere along the way, he lost his way, forgetting his original intentions. Emma was blamed over and over, lying alone on a shabby bed, licking her wounds. A few days ago, she was pushed down the stairs. James had a chance to stand by her, but he slapped her instead without knowing the full story. Emma left in despair. Her world plunged into darkness. James showed the notebook to the Wilson parents. Initially, they didn't believe it, but once they recognized Kyle's handwriting, their world shattered. When confronted with such solid evidence, Kyle stopped lying and knelt before the Wilson parents, repeatedly apologizing. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have tricked you. I just felt so insecure, scared you'd abandon me, so I blamed my cousin. Just give me one more chance, and I'll be good to you." Blood streamed down her forehead, but the Wilson parents just stared coldly. The notebook's content was shocking, revealing a cruel truth. They had favored their niece over their daughter, only to find out she was so deceitful. The Wilsons exchanged a glance, filled with endless regret. Was there still time to make things right? Seeing that all her self-harm couldn't win any sympathy from the three, Kyle finally dropped the act, her face twisted in anger. "Did I do anything wrong? It's everyone for themselves in this world. I just wanted a good life. Even if I had to do it all over again, I'd do the same," Mr. Wilson roared, kicking Kyle away, rushing to punch and kick her until she cried for mercy. Mrs. Wilson joined, hitting harder. The love they once had for Kyle turned into burning hatred. James looked on with scorn. What good is it to wake up now? Kyle, barely alive from the beating, lay on the ground, unable to cry any longer, like a dead dog. The Wilson parents came to their senses, looking at James with shame. "Can you find Emma? We've wronged her all these years, and we want to make it up to her." James didn't answer but gazed out into the night, his voice tinged with confusion and pain. "And what if we find her? We've already lost her." The Wilson parents trembled, their heads lowered, eyes brimming with tears. At the National Defense University's Xiangnan campus, it's a secret place. Besides the troops stationed there to protect the region, it's also a training base for selected professionals. The campus is split into two, the outskirts of the city for the troops and the central area for the students. The sun was high as students in uniform trained under the sweltering summer heat, their clothes drenched in sweat, but standing tall like pine trees, staring ahead with determination. As students of the university's decryption program, they needed to learn specialized knowledge alongside physical training. Emma had been there for half a month, using the training methods Robert taught her to make do with her not-so-strong physique. The food there was better than outside. Back in 1983, school conditions weren't great, and having meat at home was a luxury. Her parents gave all the good things to Kyle, leaving Emma with vegetable scraps, sleeping on a damp balcony. But at school, with ample nutrition, Emma started growing taller. She cut her hair into a bob, looking lively and spirited, her eyes bright, completely unlike the sad, heartbroken girl who once seemed ready to collapse. She had an entirely new aura. From the moment Emma met the National Defense University admissions officer, she was impressed by their demeanor. The atmosphere really nurtured people. Surrounded by people with integrity, there's no time to dwell on petty affairs. The military training would last 3 months. Emma had adapted to the college rhythm, spending her days in physical training and evenings in the library. Her major in decryption meant facing highly challenging situations in the future, unable to reveal her identity, truly a hidden figure. Each student in the decryption program is a national treasure. Emma cherishes this hard-earned learning environment. Here, there are no biased parents or disloyal James. There's only the pursuit of knowledge and the chance to serve her country. Point 11. She was like a sponge absorbing knowledge in the library, even late into the night. There were many other students with her, coming from all over the country, each one a top student in their own right. She had been ranked first back in her county, but now she felt immense pressure. Everyone around her seemed to have a burning passion to serve the nation. This late night, Emma reluctantly left the library, amazed by the endless sea of books. She thought to herself, even spending her whole life in the library, she wouldn't read them all. Thankfully, for now, she was focused on learning the basics of cryptology before the classes started. The night was calm and cool. Emma walked along the path, paused to look at the sky, and a memory of home flickered in her mind. She had left, possibly never to return. Her family of 4 was probably doing well. In the beginning, even though she was utterly disappointed in them, she missed them. Being away in a foreign place naturally brought about homesickness. But as time passed, the voices of her parents and James faded. Aside from fleeting thoughts, there were no more emotional waves. Her affection for James had long cooled. At college, she wasn't without friends. Aside from her 5 roommates, she had also met Ethan from Beijing. He was different, not like James at all. Cheerful and outgoing, like a well-protected flower in a greenhouse, yet with strong abilities, especially in cryptology. He was the most talented in the subject she had ever seen. From the moment Ethan entered the school, he was admired by many. Although there were no bans on dating at the National Defense University, he caught a lot of girls' attention. Some said he was from a good family in the big city. Others said he was here just to add a feather to his cap, and would leave soon. Emma didn't care for these comparisons. She preferred walking alone. But no one expected Ethan to approach her and express his interest. This caught everyone by surprise, including Emma, who found it quite odd. Emma reached the dorm and saw a tall figure standing ahead, smiling at her. Ethan was very forward with Emma, not in a romantic sense, but more about professional discussions. Still, waiting late at night by the dorm entrance was quite unusual at the time. The guys heading back to their dorms couldn't help but glance over, their eyes full of playful smirks. Emma just wanted to turn and leave, but seeing Ethan standing there persistently, she braced herself and approached him. Ethan handed her a notebook, smiling broadly. "Emma, here's my study notes." Emma looked at the pink notebook, hesitating whether to take it. She loved studying and knew Ethan was top-notch in their field, already having a deep understanding of cryptology. He was a true genius in the subject. They first met at the library. When everyone else was busy exploring campus, Emma preferred her solitude, reading in a corner. Her acceptance into Peking University wasn't just due to her own intelligence, but also a great mentor. She never mentioned this teacher to her family, not even James. Her teacher had a troubled past, having been confined for years, and was thus stigmatized. When her teacher was gravely ill and uncared for, Emma, at 11, was also cast out of her family due to Kyle's machinations. They met in an abandoned temple, and under her teacher's guidance, she gathered herbs, risking her young life. Her teacher survived, and from then on Emma frequently visited the temple. Over time, she became her teacher's last disciple, learning that knowledge could change her life. Under this teacher's influence, Emma grew into a strong, independent learner, holding on to her kindness and a resolve to serve her country, despite the unfair treatment at home. It was the main reason she hadn't faltered. Her teacher had experienced much hardship, teaching Emma resilience. Sadly, her teacher passed away after her college entrance exams on a rainy night. She planned to share the good news of getting into Peking University, but found only a lifeless body in the temple. That night, she buried her teacher, leaving with a jade pendant as a keepsake. She lost her only mentor and confidant, and in her grief, turned to James, who then asked her to trade her university spot for something else. Emma felt her world collapse, losing both her teacher and herself. Faced with despair, she chose to live for herself, changing her path to the National Defense University, determined to dedicate herself to her country. With just a bag of old clothes and her teacher's jade pendant, she left her painful past behind. In the library, Emma often thought about her teacher, sometimes taking out the pendant for comfort. It was then that Ethan crossed her path, his eyes fixated on the pendant with a bright curiosity. Emma knew about Ethan's special background, beyond his looks. Rumor had it, his arrival at the National Defense University was accompanied by a jeep escort and a warm welcome from school leaders. Ever since spotting the pendant, Ethan clung to Emma, unfazed by convention because of his friendly nature. Even waiting outside the girls' dorm at night, Ethan ignored the stares. Looking at the notebook he offered, Emma sighed internally. She felt it was time to set things straight. Taking the notebook, she looked into Ethan's bright eyes and said sincerely, "Ethan, stop looking for me." Ethan was caught off guard, hesitated, then lowered his head, softly replying, "Okay." Point 12. He didn't say anything, but his emotions were intense. Emma held back her feelings and watched him leave, Right now, all she wanted was to study and serve her country. Love wasn't on her mind. Ethan hadn't approached her since that night. After the military training, the freshmen had a day off to unwind. Most chose to leave campus and hit the town. Besides tuition-free education, National Defense University freshmen got a monthly $10 living allowance, which was a small fortune in 1983. Emma didn't splurge. She stayed in the library, studying encryption as usual. Ethan sat across from her and pulled out a jade pendant from his pocket. It matched Emma's exactly, except hers had a dragon and his a phoenix. It was a pair of dragon and phoenix pendants that I'm your fiancé, Ethan said, almost making Emma topple over. Silence enveloped the library for a few minutes. As a student of the new era, Emma hated this engagement stuff, especially after being hurt by James. Her visions of love had turned more reasonable. She didn't want some elusive love. Love was a matter of conduct. Ethan was too bold, and a few years back, he would have been considered a hooligan. Emma took a deep breath to steady herself. Ethan, be mindful of the impact. We're here to study, serve our country and people, not for romance. We didn't know each other before. There's no engagement, right? She clearly warned Ethan not to continue, or else the counselor might have a talk with him. Ethan seemed to know his words went too far. Getting out would cause a storm. But after much thought, he decided to tell her the truth. He pointed to the pendant and shared a story with Emma. These pendants were a pair, kept by his father and an old acquaintance. They promised that if one had a boy and the other a girl, they'd be in-laws, or siblings if of the same gender. Years passed, and Ethan's father never forgot that promise. But the old friend was lost due to special circumstances. Ethan thought he'd never see the pendant again, didn't plan to marry, so he joined National Defense University. He never expected their paths would cross like this, seeing the dragon pendant around Emma's neck in the library. After hearing Ethan's story, Emma fell silent. It didn't seem absurd. Mr. Nyoping had knowledge indicating he wasn't local. Maybe he had a big background. Sadly, in Ira's casualty, Mr. Nyoping didn't leave after being vindicated, but chose to live in a ruined temple. Now Emma understood the pendant was a token. Realistically, facing a well-bred fiancé with potential future status was a blessing. But hurt by James, she no longer trusted love. At National Defense, students' affections could only be revolutionary feelings. Emma hesitated, handing the dragon pendant back to Ethan. I'm not Mr. Nyoping's child. If I knew its importance, I wouldn't have taken it. Now let it return to you. As for marriage, let's forget it. Without giving Ethan a chance to respond, Emma got up and left. Ethan, sitting alone, felt wronged. Since meeting Emma, her uniqueness stood out to him. Her distinct aura had a hint of sadness beyond the firm revolutionary belief. In his age group, he'd never seen such an eye, like an endless abyss, easily ensnaring anyone who approached. Holding the pendant, Ethan stepped outside. The night sky above the library looked beautiful. The leaves on the sycamores by the field seemed untouched by fall, still vibrant. Emma returned to her dorm, sat on the balcony, silently gazing at the sky. She decided to focus on studying, staying away from Ethan. After the military drill, cultural classes began. In this era of restoration, students thirsted for knowledge. They bore immense belief in innocence. Besides cultural studies, Emma kept up with her physical training. She bumped into Ethan a few times at the cafeteria. They'd nod at each other and pass by. Many had gossiped about their odd relationship, almost involving a counselor. But soon they drifted apart, and nothing came of it. Most girls were relieved, thinking Ethan wasn't meant for anyone. One day, Emma was running on the track like usual, and suddenly stopped. Her face fell. It was him, James. At the sight of Emma, James couldn't help but walk toward her. But Emma's subtle move made his face pale. That once adored, joyful girl now recoiled. Defensive as if seeing an enemy, James felt a piercing ache in his heart, breathless with anguish. Emma hated him this much? James bit back his sorrow, stepping forward again, only to see Emma retreat. He looked wounded. Emma, before James could utter more. Emma coldly cut him off. James, this is school, mind the impression. A spark of shock crossed James's eyes. It sounded familiar. He quickly recalled when Emma excitedly shared her acceptance to Peking University. He instinctively kept distance, saying it was the yard and to pay attention. Now James felt deeply wronged, understanding the hurt he'd caused Emma before. Trying to stay composed, James said, "Emma, you left without a word. Are you really cutting me off?" 13. Hearing this, Emma's expression stayed neutral. She didn't argue, but her indifferent attitude pierced James's heart deeply. He understood what Emma meant. Living in a loveless home, always forced to give up the best things. Once you give in, you're expected to do it forever. She was already hopeless. It takes such deep despair to erase your identity, to live anonymously forever, never wanting to connect again. Just thinking about it hurt James deep in his chest, and Emma had endured such a cruel life for years. How did he even dare to ask? If Emma hadn't quietly left, she would have been forced to death. James lifted his head, wanting to pat Emma's head like he did when they were kids. But his arm hung in the air, and when he met her indifferent eyes, his spirit took another blow. "I'm sorry." All his words condensed into a simple "I'm sorry." He had no idea what else to say. Emma looked up at the sky, and after a long moment, her gaze fell on the sycamore tree by the edge of the playground. Memories flashed of when she was 11, kicked out by her parents, sobbing under the tree. James had been like an angel that day, bringing her new hope. But it was precisely this hope that pushed her into the abyss. Her heart still faintly ached to this day. Emma refocused, her eyes now determined as she stared at James. "If you're here to help Kyle get the beta spot back, I'm sorry, but that ship has sailed, and I won't give it up." James's face changed drastically as he shook his head frantically. "No, I just wanted to see you." He desperately wanted to tell Emma it was all a misunderstanding, that he never disliked her or rejected her. But recalling all the mistakes made during that time, he was too ashamed to say it. "Now that you've seen me, you can leave." Emma didn't want any contact with James. Seeing his face only reminded her of the pain from 6 months ago. It had taken her months to heal that wound. Why did he have to stir things up again? James trembled, feeling like he was about to lose Emma for good, and urgently grabbed her hand with a mix of sadness and grievance on his face. "Emma, why did we end up like this?" James's voice shook with pain. Calmly, Emma responded, "That's the same question I've been asking. How did it come to this?" When James kept hurting her for Kyle, Emma had screamed this question countless times in her mind. But it didn't matter anymore. "Brother, this is the last time I'll call you that. I wish you and Kyle happiness. Don't come looking for me again." Just as James tried to insist, Emma's next words struck him like lightning, making him freeze in place. "I still thank you for the warmth and hope you once gave me. Please don't make me hate you." James stood stiffly, his face turning ashen. Only after Emma's figure vanished completely did he crouch down, overwhelmed with regret and sorrow. Even someone as tough as James, who wouldn't flinch at taking a bullet, had tears brimming in his eyes, sorrow etched across his face. The image of that sweet, admiring girl, Emma, no longer matched the person she had become. James clearly realized it was possible he was truly losing Emma. The late autumn sycamore finally shed a leaf, which landed on James's shoulder. James had never been more certain of his feelings for Emma, but by the time he realized it, she was already gone. Although the weather was hot in Xiangnan, the air felt icy cold to James, his body numb and unable to move. Gazing toward where Emma disappeared, the excruciating heartache hit him, almost knocking him down. Ever since Emma silently left, James's life seemed like a void. Grief over losing someone dear overwhelmed him, and logic returned. He quickly found evidence of Kyle's deceit. But why had he always turned a blind eye when Emma was hurt? For over 6 months, James desperately searched for Emma, risking his future. Yet he couldn't break through the defense barriers at her university until Robert, his father, seeing his son lost in misery, reluctantly called a friend there. Upon learning about Emma, James rushed over immediately. He thought explaining everything would return things to normal. But when he saw Emma's calm, indifferent gaze, James realized how naive he had been. Her eyes no longer showed the admiration they once held. The girl who always wanted to share everything, who was emotionally so dependent on him, had faded with the wind. In her place stood a stranger. James wanted to explain several times, but when he thought of his past actions, he couldn't bring himself to speak and let her leave. Like autumn leaves from a sycamore, eventually, one with the earth. He stood under the sycamore for a long time, looking down at the fallen leaves, recalling that time when he held Emma's hand, promising her a home, and that they'd never be apart. Sadly, he had broken that promise, and perhaps hurt Emma more than Kyle ever did. In this moment, James felt lost and pained, deeply understanding the despair and resignation Emma felt toward her family and him. Emma didn't return to her dorm. Instead, she wandered around campus, not wanting to face James. Her peaceful college life stirred again because of his arrival. Distracted and troubled, Emma unknowingly ended up at the library. Staring at the closed doors, she crouched on the steps, bathed in the cold moonlight, shivering. When she was 11, it was James who gave her new hope. For 7 years she loved him. But at 18, it was James who crushed all her expectations. Now he claimed it was all a misunderstanding. Yet the memories of hurt streamed through her mind, leaving Emma unsure if she could trust James again. The moment she saw James, Emma realized she wasn't completely detached. She still felt heartache. She hadn't fully let go. At that moment, a pair of shoes appeared in front of her, glowing softly in the moonlight. Emma slowly looked up and saw Ethan. 14 Ethan sat next to her, both gazing at the night sky. "Go ahead, speak your mind. It'll help," he said. Emma had been carrying a lot in her heart with no one to tell it to. Years of hidden pain nearly drove her mad. Though she barely knew Ethan, his presence gave her a sense of safety. In the moonlight, Emma began to share her story. Her biased parents, her unfaithful fiancé, and her broken self. Her voice was soft, as if relating someone else's tale. Ethan rested his chin on his hand, listening quietly. One spoke calmly, the other listened silently. Time seemed to stand still. "Do you still love him?" Ethan asked after Emma finished, curiosity flickering in his eyes, barely concealing a hint of panic. Emma thought this question would tie her in knots, making it hard to answer. But unexpectedly, an answer emerged instantly. "No, I don't love him anymore." The truth was clear. When disappointment piled up, she became immune to love and family. Ethan hadn't expected such a quick reply and was taken aback, but his face brightened with a smile, like a March breeze or dazzling fireworks, warming Emma's heart. She had to admit, she liked being around this Ethan. "Then tell her," he said, meaning her younger self, "cut ties with the past to move toward the future." Rising, he patted Emma's shoulder. "Go get some rest. Sleep. Tomorrow will be better." Emma unlocked her heart and fell asleep as soon as she returned to the dorm. When she woke, the morning sunshine warmed her face, and she felt light. In the following days, Emma attended classes as usual, but kept encountering James. Whether heading to class, in the cafeteria, or during evening study, James would quietly be there, often standing off to the side, eyes filled with a gentle depth, a striking figure in his military attire, his presence a beautiful highlight on campus. Gradually, people began to notice a connection between James and Emma. In the winter of 1983, while minds were still not fully liberated, romantic relations easily turned into personal conduct issues, fueling rumors. On the 6th night after James arrived at the Defense University, the warm southern region finally got a bout of cold rain. Emma was reading in her dorm when someone said a man was standing outside. She instantly knew who it was. After a moment of silence, she decided to go downstairs and face him. Emma realized she needed a clear conversation with James. She stepped out into the rain, his silhouette blurred by the downpour. Taking a deep breath, she walked towards him. The first autumn rain carried a chill, and there he was, drenched, eyes full of longing and helplessness, watching her approach. Once, when James wasn't happy, Emma would have done anything, even brought down the moon, to cheer him up. Now, seeing his sadness, she felt surprisingly calm, even slightly irritated. Belated affection seemed worthless compared to weeds. All the love she'd held onto for years, the man she vowed to protect all her life, had lost its meaning through repeated neglect. When Emma severed her affections and applied to a cryptography program to serve her country, James claimed everything was a misunderstanding. Perhaps, their entire encounter was a beautiful mistake. Placing an umbrella over James' head, Emma gently wiped the water from his face with tender gestures that made his eyes glisten with hope. Not worth it. Emma shook her head, a freeing smile on her face. She looked past James to the rain-veiled phoenix tree behind him. Thank you for what you did for me. You helped me through a cold, desperate winter, more painful than any battles others might have faced. But you also slowly disappointed me. You can't hide what you've done. The scars remain indelible, she said. James, you're not the brother I used to admire and love anymore. James' expression changed dramatically, his lips trembling with a desperate shake of his head. He wanted to tell Emma he was always the brother she knew, the one who loved her, but was too scared to face it. But as he met Emma's calm, indifferent eyes, the words lodged in his throat, refusing to come out. Emma wiped the raindrops from his eyes, those once warm hands now cold, sending a chill through James' body. Though she was right in front of him, she felt distant. James, trying desperately to hold on to the girl before him, found that Emma's words pierced his heart, leaving him awash in emotional bloodshed that he recalled being forced by parents and the painful, despairing cries of being ruthlessly abandoned. That night as Emma tumbled down from the second floor, pain seizing her breath, her yearning eyes meeting his before his slap severed their bond completely. Perhaps that slap extinguished Emma's love. Emma, I'm sorry. I took a week off to see you, only a week. I'll leave tomorrow if it bothers you. But can I have just one more chance? James pleaded through tears, a look of hope on his face. Emma gave no reply, simply looking at him, unmoved by his tears. At that moment, they both seemed to understand something. James' body swayed, eyes shut in pain. Seeing him cry no longer hurt Emma, confirming that she didn't love him anymore. Leaving the umbrella with James, she turned and headed back to her dorm, determined to part ways with James once and for all, never wanting to meet again. James, Kyle, and her biased parents could find happiness together. She left out, would devote her life to the country. Emma didn't regret it. It was her choice and her destiny. After ending love, she had to light a lamp for herself. James dropped his umbrella and rushed forward, hugging Emma tightly from behind. He pleaded, Emma, please don't leave me. I was wrong, so wrong. Emma didn't struggle. She let James hold her and closed her eyes. Time seemed to stand still until the rain finally stopped. The moon broke through the clouds, casting its cool light on the sycamore trees by the playground. In that moment, James and Emma's shadow seemed etched in time. James slowly let go, his heart torn apart. Emma walked away without a backward glance. James was devastated, kneeling on the ground and crying painfully. He realized he had lost Emma for good. At that moment, he understood the despair Emma had felt before. It was unforgettable, like a leech that doesn't let go. He finally got it and regretted it, but it was too late. After their break, James left the National Defense University. On the day he left, he didn't say goodbye to Emma. He knew she wouldn't see him, and he understood she had moved on. James knew he had messed up badly. Before all this, he had a marriage application in his pocket. If Emma filled it out, they would have been legally married. But from Emma's attitude, it was clear, getting back together was impossible. His heart was broken, and he had no excuses. He had driven her away with his own hands, adding salt to the wound in many desperate nights. He now fully felt the pain of despair, and realized that true love sometimes means not disturbing the other person. James decided he wouldn't give up on Emma. He would find a way to atone and make amends. He wanted to show Emma through his actions that he was still the guy who held her hand and promised she'd never be alone. When he left, the weather was gloomy. Sitting on the train home, watching the city shrink into the distance, James closed his eyes. When he opened them, determination gleamed in them. Anyone who hurt Emma would pay, including himself. Emma had no idea about James' plans and wasn't interested. After making things clear with him, she went back to her usual student life, focused on studying and physical training. Although she spent the first half of the year alone, she later met Ethan. After that night, Emma realized she couldn't live trying to please others or be tied down by emotions. She used to crave her parents' love and James's approval, which was exhausting. Now she didn't miss her biased, cold family because they weren't worth it. She didn't care what others thought, and walked with Ethan openly. There was no romance between them, just a partnership focused on learning. Ethan seemed to come from a good family. He knew a lot and had access to the latest study materials. When Ethan pulled out a computer program and explained its use in decryption, Emma seized the opportunity. Ethan was happy to stay by her side, using his resources to help her get cutting-edge decryption materials. Emma returned the favor whenever she could. To outsiders, they seemed like a couple, so no more rumors circulated. Attitudes in school were liberal. Young people were open to new experiences. Their guidance counselor only held one meeting about conduct, and then dropped it. Emma and Ethan's relationship developed naturally, rooted in camaraderie. Photos of them studying side by side in the library made their way to James, who was miles away at the security office. In a dim room, James sat on a sofa head down, surrounded by empty bottles. The smell of alcohol hung heavy in the air. It was only the second time he'd drunk since joining the service. The first was when Emma confessed her love to him. He had spent that night drinking and thinking. The second time was when he saw Emma with Ethan. It hurt. Shouting echoed from the next room, where the Wilson family's parents were punishing Kyle. Her dirty tricks had been exposed, ruining her reputation. She couldn't even find a simple job or gig. With no living skills, Kyle had to rely on the Wilson family, but they were done with her. Whatever she had done to frame Emma, she was now facing it 100-fold in punishment. Kyle couldn't handle the suffering and begged James for help. His punishment would be even harsher than the Wilson family's. From then on, Kyle lived in misery. They all tried to help Emma get revenge in hopes of forgiveness. But did Emma even care? The Wilson parents visibly aged, always wearing expressions of regret and sadness, living in torment. James refused promotions, staying in the team to wait for the right moment. Time passed over 3 years. Kyle was a shadow of her former self, with dark circles under her eyes and unstable mental health, even diagnosed with depression. The Wilsons cried and pleaded to see their daughter, but James wouldn't tell them. They deserved this. Finally, it was graduation season at the National Defense University. James got a call, abruptly left the security office. It was time for him to atone. Everyone got ready. The mission was crucial, no mistakes allowed. In the summer of 1987, newly graduated college students felt compelled to support the Northwest, but safety issues arose. Back then, getting into college was a big deal, almost an honor. Each graduate was considered a National Treasure. 16. The National Defense University's code-breaking major isn't taking the usual path. Instead, it set up a research center in the Northwest, secretly researching computer code breaking. It's a super-secret mission, crucial for future modern warfare. When the batch of national defense students graduated, they were sent straight to the Northwest, attracting hostile foreign powers who tried to sabotage them. A special operations brigade was assigned for their escort. James was the leader of this escort mission, always staying hidden to avoid being noticed by enemies. He wore his uniform, standing on a hill, watching the convoy below with sharp eyes. But his gaze softened when he looked at the lead vehicle. James had accomplished a lot over the years, but refused promotions, waiting for a particular opportunity. When the university's code-breaking team was heading to the Northwest, he immediately volunteered for the escort mission. Ever since Emma left the academy, James felt like he lost his purpose there. He wanted to be the protective brother he once was, to show her he hadn't changed. For him, redemption meant protecting her from the shadows. Plus, reaching the destination meant he could spend time with Emma. It was the only thing James felt he could do. Inside the convoy, Emma gazed out at the vast desert landscape. As they traveled deeper into the Northwest, the environment grew harsher. She realized that the challenges outside the campus were beyond anything she'd experienced in school. Her 4 years of college changed her a lot, turning her from a naive girl to a mature woman. Emma graduated top of her class, the most outstanding of her peers, and was entrusted with a critical mission in the Northwest. During the journey, Emma noticed the convoy stopped several times, but always resumed quickly. She wasn't aware of the numerous attacks that occurred outside, all intercepted by their escort team. Once they reached the research center, the original 200-strong escort team had over 100 casualties, showing the intense battles along the way. Everyone immediately started working upon arrival, no rest in sight. Emma got to the research center, quickly noted the outdated communication equipment, and sent a report recommending an upgrade. She had written several impactful papers on national defense information security back in school, which provided significant insights. The higher-ups tasked her with leading, hoping she could elevate defense information security to new heights. Emma didn't disappoint. In just 3 months, she revitalized the research center and significantly boosted their code defense capabilities. Just 3 months into the job, she earned a top honor. While working, Emma often felt like someone was watching her. But whenever she turned around, no one was there, chalking it up to exhaustion-induced hallucinations. One time, a heavy rainstorm washed away a crucial communication station during a critical experiment. Emma rushed out to save it, braving the dangerous conditions. Though she fixed the station, she fell into a trap and got stuck in a cave. With the downpour outside, contacting anyone was nearly impossible. She stayed trapped for 3 days, and as she neared death, her vision blurred. She saw what seemed like a beam of light, and a familiar figure emerged, carrying her out step by step. The figure was tall and strong, safely carrying Emma to the cave's entrance. Breathing fresh air felt incredible after being so close to death. Emma wanted to thank her rescuer, but he handed her to the medics and disappeared. She tried calling out, but weakly fell unconscious again. After 3 days in the infirmary regaining strength, Emma searched everywhere for her savior, but no one spoke of him. The research center director personally urged her to focus on her work, saying it was their duty to protect researchers, and anyone would have done the same. Emma nodded, not thinking much of it, but she learned that the special unit had been secretly guarding them since they left school. 3 years later, Emma developed the second-generation communication system, greatly enhancing the team's operational capabilities. Consequently, she rose to deputy director of the research center. Before leaving the desert, the director sought her out, revealing something devastating. Due to the importance of their communication research, the center frequently faced enemy attacks. Within 3 years, they'd thwarted over 70 strikes, but at the cost of many comrades' lives. Still, they foiled the enemy's plots and completed their mission. The director handed Emma a photo, pausing before speaking somberly. While he hadn't wanted to distract her with it, given she's leaving, he had to be honest. The special brigade lost over 200 members protecting their mission. Emma trembled, tears welling up as she raised a glass in their honor. The director nodded, sighing, pointing out she must have been quite familiar with the captain. Puzzled, Emma shook her head. She didn't know any captain. Yet images of James flashed through her mind. She shook them away, smiling to herself. James should be back at the academy, maybe even married to Kyle, with a kid by now. She thought it impossible for him to have been on such a mission in the desert. But what the director said next hit her like a bolt out of the blue. It turned out that James was the captain, secretly protecting Emma for 3 years. During her fall into the cave, it was James who risked everything to save her, injuring his leg in the process. James had thwarted multiple assassination attempts on Emma, paying a heavy price each time. Once the second-generation communication system was completed, the brigade's mission succeeded, and they began withdrawing. James had been on the front lines for a long time, fighting against hostile forces. He got shot 3 times, and 1 bullet almost hit his heart. He nearly died, but even then, he refused to leave and insisted on staying on the front lines. Today is the day James leaves. The boss probably guessed about James and Emma's relationship, so he kindly reminded him. Even though James had strictly warned the boss, Emma looked at the photo on the table. It was a picture of her and Ethan sitting shoulder to shoulder in the library. Although Ethan's photo was torn away, she recognized it instantly. Could James really have been around all this time? Why hadn't they met in 3 years? Emma's emotions were complicated as she recalled what the boss said. James had blocked bullets for her several times, and even saved her a few times in the past 3 years. Yet he never took credit or wanted to meet in person. He just stayed hidden, silently watching over her. Emma suddenly remembered being 11 years old, sitting under a sycamore tree crying, when James appeared like an angel, holding her hand and promising he'd protect her for life. She thought their last meeting would be at the National Defense University campus, never expecting to see James again. But his actions left her deeply shaken. Emma wasn't the naive kid she used to be, but something about James' behavior always seemed so incredibly sad to her. She took a deep breath, grabbed the photo, and rushed outside. Emma made it outside the research center just in time to see a Jeep driving away. She yelled, "James!" There was no response. She sensed that James was there, but why didn't he answer? Meanwhile, in the leaving car, James glanced at Emma from the rearview mirror. His cool demeanor showed a glimpse of emotion, but he quickly suppressed it. The guard hesitated. "Should we turn back, sir?" James looked at his empty left arm and closed his eyes. "Keep going. To protect Emma." He lost his left hand in a life-and-death fight with the enemy, rendering him disabled. The organization had now forcefully arranged for him to leave and receive treatment. James wanted to continue watching over Emma, but knew in his current state, he'd be nothing but a burden. So he had no choice but to agree. He guarded Emma's safety in his own way, but he couldn't keep walking beside her for long. There was still a long road ahead. James's heart ached. For 3 years, he watched Emma from a distance, busy in the lab, wanting to be with her. Yet he always held himself back, thinking he'd done too many things that hurt her. Truly loving someone sometimes means not interfering. Besides, given his current state, he felt unworthy of Emma. Emma deserved a better partner. James never told Emma he had been there, nor did he tell her he was leaving. 10 years later, nearly 20 years into the country's reform and opening, the nation transformed dramatically, especially with the significant progress in the 4th generation of national defense information security development. Thanks to continuous efforts over generations, although not reaching international standards, the progress remained fast. Emma, graduating as a defense major in 1987, gradually honed her skills over the years, evolving from a naive graduate to an expert in information technology. She devoted all her time to the digitization of military forces and became the youngest corps-level officer, now the leading expert in the field. Emma had deeply rooted herself in the desert, living a simple and humble life without any luxuries, just wanting to serve her country. Seeing her working so hard, the higher-ups forced her to take a break. Emma reluctantly left the experimental base and returned to the city. Given her sensitive and special status, she was under constant protection, with a jeep leading the way. Not fond of such displays, she took her guards and left on her own after reporting to the superiors. The first place she went was the National Defense University to attend the 1998 graduation ceremony. She gave a speech on stage while the young students below looked at her with admiration. Known as a key figure in encryption specialists, less than 40, already sitting alongside the principal, she was practically a celebrity among students. Emma looked at the starry-eyed students, remembering how she once looked at James like that. Decades had passed, and she'd long forgotten her love for James. Her memory remained stuck on that departing jeep in the Northwest desert. 10 years had gone by with no word from him. She had tried calling the security zone where James once was, hoping to thank him, but they said James had retired and was no longer there. Emma sat on the stage, gazing at the students below, seeing them as the future of national defense, just like she once was. Yet her mind floated back home, wanting to see James. When forced to take a break, she couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to do something. It wasn't about rekindling any romance with James. At her age, her life belonged to the party and the people. Emma went home as soon as she left the National Defense University. Without alerting anyone, she headed to the old security compound and stood under the sycamore tree. After all these years, the tree looked the same, though the ground was paved, no longer bare earth. The compound hadn't changed, still looking traditional with red bricks and green tiles. Emma stood outside the yard, looking towards where she used to live. She didn't think about her biased parents. They now had Kyle, and she doubted they'd shed a tear if she died away from home. Besides visiting Robert, she wanted to thank James personally, but inquiries revealed Robert had moved due to a job transfer, and people seemed unsure about James's retirement, suggesting he might have gone north with Robert. As for her parents, whom she was least eager to see, They'd moved away for unknown reasons. Emma felt somewhat relieved, though there was a tinge of disappointment. Her time was limited, with work calling her back, so she didn't linger long. Emma returned to the sycamore tree, standing there for a while, and answering a call from her husband Ethan. "You've been away for so long. Why not come home now that you're on break? Your daughter misses you. 18 Mama. Emma heard her daughter's voice, and a gentle smile appeared on her determined face. She hung up the phone, got into her car, and drove away. A breeze came, and a plane tree dropped a leaf. Fall was here. But Emma didn't notice that in James's house, by the window, someone was quietly watching her leave. James didn't leave with Robert. He stayed in the yard waiting. He didn't even know what he was waiting for, but he just waited. When Emma really did come back, though, James didn't have the courage to see her. He just stood in the shadows, like a silent guardian in a desert. He once wasn't able to face her, and now he lacks the courage to meet her. All James could do was send his blessings. Once he confirmed that Emma's car was gone, he slowly went downstairs to thank the neighbors. If it weren't for their discretion, Emma might have discovered the truth. Carrying a basket, James headed to the cemetery. Here lay the graves of the Wilson family's parents, and not far away was a solitary grave. It was 5 years ago, when Kyle couldn't bear the torment anymore. She used a sharp knife to kill the Wilson family parents, who had once loved her dearly. Suffering from severe depression, after killing them, she slashed her wrists in the bathroom. When discovered, there were only 3 bodies left in the house. James used his connections to keep this from Emma, because he didn't want her to be heartbroken. Staring at the Wilson family parents' gravestone, James sighed and looked up at the sky. Emma is back. She's doing well. You don't have to worry. It's the living who suffer after you've gone. I hope Emma will always be happy. I believe that's what you would have wanted too. James stood up and walked away, his figure casting long shadows in the setting sun. Alone and desolate, he recalled Emma confessing to him at the age of 17. Her young face turning red with an excited, hopeful look, like a little son. If only he had agreed back then, maybe everything would be different now. But there are no ifs. He can only live in endless regret until his life ends. Back in Beijing, Emma returned home to see her husband sitting on the sofa, rocking their daughter to sleep, softly humming a lullaby, his face glowing with fatherly pride. She married Ethan in her 30s. She never expected Ethan to wait for her all those years. Emma walked to the window, looking at the child in her husband's arms. The child's young face looked so much like her own when she was small. Unable to resist, she reached out to touch. Ethan glanced at her, whispering, "She just fell asleep. Don't wake her. You'll have to put her back to sleep if you do." Emma gave an awkward smile. In this house, she always had no say. Watching her husband and daughter, a wave of strong guilt surged through Emma. She felt guilty for working outside for so many years without spending time with them. She gently hugged her husband from behind, closing her eyes. They had a perfect family. No matter how busy she was, she would love her husband and daughter, ensuring they never experienced the hardships of her own childhood. Everything would be fine, just like the country now, growing stronger and more prosperous step by step. Home exists because of the country. The end.